My name is Mason Phillips, and at 32, I've built a life I'm proud of, including my dream lakeside home. 14 years ago, my parents disowned me when I chose tech school over our family hardware store. Last month, after complete silence, they called out of the blue with an outrageous demand. They wanted me to host my golden child brother Brandon's lavish wedding at my home. When I refused, they decided to ambush me anyway. They had no idea what I had planned in response. Before I dive into this wild story, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to stand up to family who took you for granted. Growing up in the small town of Riverdale, my life revolved around Phillips Hardware, the store my grandfather opened in 1965. My parents, Gerald and Eleanor Phillips, were hardworking people who poured everything into that business, expecting their sons to continue the legacy. From the beginning, the difference in how they treated me and my younger brother Brandon was clear as day. While Brandon got new clothes at the start of each school year, I wore hand-me-downs from our cousins until I was old enough to work part-time jobs to buy my own. When Brandon made the junior varsity basketball team, my parents threw a backyard barbecue and invited the whole extended family. When I won the state science fair with a computer program I coded myself, they barely acknowledged it beyond a cursory, "That's nice." The pattern was consistent and unmistakable. "Mason, why can't you be more like your brother?" became the soundtrack of my teenage years. Brandon was athletic, sociable, and most importantly, showed interest in the family business. I was quieter, more analytical, and completely captivated by computers and technology. By 16, I was spending every spare moment in the school computer lab or at the public library, teaching myself programming languages and building small applications. Mr. Reeves, my computer science teacher, recognized my aptitude and began mentoring me, even lending me books and occasionally letting me take home one of the school's older laptops for weekend projects. "You have a real gift, Mason," he told me during my junior year. "You should consider applying to tech programs after graduation." The idea lit a fire in me. For the first time, I could see a future that excited me, a path that aligned with my interests and abilities. When acceptance letters started arriving senior year, including one with a partial scholarship to a prestigious tech institute in California, I was ecstatic. My parents were not. "This family has run this store for 3 generations," my father said firmly when I showed him the acceptance letter. "Brandon will need your help when I retire. This computer nonsense is just a hobby, not a career." "But Dad, this is a real opportunity. The scholarship covers half the tuition, and I can work part-time to help with expenses," I argued. "And who's supposed to pay the other half?" he demanded. "We've been saving for Brandon's business degree. There's nothing left for your computer games." That night sparked weeks of escalating arguments. Every discussion ended the same way: I needed to accept my responsibility to the family business. My desires and aptitudes didn't matter. The final confrontation came 3 days after graduation. I'd received an email confirming an additional merit scholarship that would cover most of my remaining tuition if I committed within the week. "I'm accepting the offer," I told my parents over dinner. "I leave for orientation in August." My father's face turned a dangerous shade of red. "If you walk away from this family, don't expect to come back. We won't support someone who turns his back on his responsibilities." "Gerald," my mother said quietly, but she didn't contradict him. Brandon, 18 at the time, just stared at his plate, saying nothing in my defense. "I'm not turning my back on anyone," I said, my voice shaking. "I'm pursuing an education in something I'm good at. If you leave for California, you're no longer a part of this family," my father stated flatly. "Your choice." 2 weeks later, I packed everything I owned into my used Honda Civic. My mother hugged me stiffly at the door but didn't say a word. My father didn't even come downstairs. Brandon gave me an awkward side hug and mumbled, "Good luck, I guess." And just like that, I was on my own at 18. The first semester was brutal. The partial scholarships covered most of tuition but almost nothing for living expenses. I slept in my car for the first month, showering at the campus gym, until I found a job stocking shelves overnight at a grocery store that paid just enough for me to rent a tiny room in a house with 5 other students. I worked 2, sometimes 3 part-time jobs while carrying a full course load. There were nights I got only 3 hours of sleep before dragging myself to morning classes. During winter break of freshman year, I caught pneumonia from exhaustion and spent Christmas alone in a hospital room. I called home once, when the fever was at its worst and the loneliness unbearable. My mother answered. When I told her I was in the hospital, there was a long pause. "I'm sorry to hear that, Mason," she said finally, her voice distant. "I hope you feel better soon." Then she hung up. After that, I stopped reaching out. No birthday cards, no holiday greetings, no updates about my life. And from their side, complete radio silence. 14 years of it. In that time, I finished my degree, built a career, created a successful company, and constructed a life they knew nothing about. A life that, as it turned out, they would suddenly find very useful when they needed something from me. The Tech Institute was everything I'd hoped for and more. Despite the physical exhaustion of working multiple jobs, my mind thrived. For the first time, I was surrounded by people who spoke my language, who got excited about the same things I did. Professor Keller, who taught advanced cryptography, became a mentor after I stayed late one evening to ask questions about his lecture. "You have an intuitive grasp of patterns that can't be taught," he told me. "Keep pushing yourself." Junior year, I developed a security protocol for my final project that caught the attention of several visiting tech companies. One of them, CyberShield Solutions, offered me an internship that summer. That's where I met Sophia Harris, a brilliant network specialist with warm brown eyes and a laugh that made everyone around her smile. "You look like you haven't slept in about 3 years," she said bluntly when we were assigned to the same project team. "That's because I haven't," I admitted. She started bringing me coffee every morning after that, and gradually, our conversations extended beyond work. She was the first person I told about my family situation, on a rare night out after we'd successfully completed a major project. "Their loss," she said simply, squeezing my hand. Some people never recognize the treasure right in front of them. After graduation, CyberShield hired me full-time. The steady income meant I could finally rent a decent apartment, and buy furniture that wasn't salvaged from dumpsters. For 2 years I learned everything I could about the industry, working alongside some of the brightest minds in cybersecurity. Then, at 24, I took a risk. The security protocol I'd developed in college had continued to evolve in my mind. I believed it could be expanded into something revolutionary, a system that could protect vulnerable data points that other security measures missed. With Sophia's encouragement, I quit my job to found Philips Security Systems. The first year was brutal. Potential investors were skeptical of such a young founder. Our savings dwindled as I refined the software. There were nights I lay awake wondering if I'd made a catastrophic mistake. "We believed in this when we had nothing," Sophia reminded me during the darkest period. "I still believe in it. I still believe in you." Her faith wasn't misplaced. In our second year, my system prevented a major data breach at a mid-sized healthcare company that had taken a chance on our startup. Word spread quickly after that. By year 3, we had contracts with 2 government agencies and several Fortune 500 companies. At 28, I bought out my early investors and expanded the company to 30 employees. At 29, we opened a second office in Seattle. And at 30, I purchased 5 acres of lakefront property 2 hours outside the city, with a modest house that had seen better days but had the potential to become something special. "This is it," I told Sophia as we stood on the dock that first evening, watching the sunset turn the water to gold. We'd been together for 7 years by then, partners in every sense. This is where we build our life. Over the next 2 years, we renovated every inch of that house, turning it into a beautiful 3-bedroom home with large windows that filled the space with light and showcased the lake views. I built a workshop where I could tinker with new ideas, and Sophia created a garden that attracted butterflies and hummingbirds. We adopted a golden retriever named Apollo who became our constant companion. Friends from work and the tech community became regular visitors. Trevor Lewis, our company's legal counsel, brought his family for barbecues in the summer. Marcus and Diana Chin, who we'd met through a local entrepreneurs group, came for game nights twice a month. Doris Reynolds, our 70-year-old neighbor down the shoreline, treated us like the grandchildren she rarely saw. These people became our chosen family. They showed up when it mattered. They celebrated our successes and supported us through setbacks. They knew our stories and accepted us exactly as we were. Meanwhile, I occasionally heard news about my biological family through connections from my hometown. The hardware store was struggling as big box retailers moved into the area. Brandon had gone to the state university and returned to help run the business. My parents were still in the same house, now approaching retirement age with a business that might not sustain them. None of this information came directly from them, of course. As far as they were concerned, I had ceased to exist the day I drove out of Riverdale. Or so I thought until that unexpected phone call 14 years after they'd shut the door behind me. I'd done a lot of emotional work by then. Weekly therapy sessions had helped me process the abandonment and rejection. I'd learned to recognize the ways their conditional love had shaped me and worked to unlearn harmful patterns. I volunteered as a mentor for tech students from disadvantaged backgrounds, determined to be the support for others that I hadn't had. You've built something beautiful from the ashes, my therapist Dr. Marshall told me during one of our sessions. That's no small accomplishment. I believed I'd found peace with my past. I was wrong. One phone call would be all it took to show me how much unresolved pain still lurked beneath the surface, ready to be weaponized by the very people who had inflicted it in the first place. It was a Tuesday morning in early April. Sophia was at a conference in Chicago, and I was working from home, troubleshooting a minor issue with our latest security update. Apollo dozed at my feet under the desk, occasionally sighing in his sleep. Rain tapped gently against the windows, creating the perfect backdrop for focused work. When my phone rang with an unknown number from my hometown area code, I almost didn't answer. Spam calls were common, and I was deep in code. Some instinct made me pick up anyway. Hello? The pause on the other end stretched just long enough that I was about to hang up when a voice from the past froze me in place. Mason? Is that you? My mother's voice. Slightly thinner than I remembered but unmistakable. My fingers tightened around the phone. Yes, I managed. This is Mason. Oh, good. I wasn't sure this was still your number. She spoke as casually as if we talked last week, not 14 years ago. How are you? The surreal normalcy of the question left me momentarily speechless. Apollo, sensing my tension, pressed his head against my leg. I'm fine, I said finally. Why are you calling, Mom? Another pause. Well, it's been so long, and your father and I were thinking it might be nice to catch up. We're actually going to be in your area next weekend. We could have dinner? The rational part of my brain immediately registered the oddity. They just happened to be visiting a city thousands of miles from home where they had no connections except the son they'd disowned? But some childlike part of me, some piece that had never stopped hoping for reconciliation, overrode the suspicion. I suppose we could do that, I heard myself saying. We arranged to meet at Marcello's, an upscale Italian restaurant downtown. After hanging up, I sat motionless for several minutes, trying to process what had just happened. Why now? What had changed? The questions circled without answers. I debated calling Sophia but decided to wait until she returned from her conference. This wasn't a conversation to have over the phone. Instead, I called Dr. Marshall, and scheduled an emergency session for the following day. Remember that you're not the same vulnerable 18-year-old they last saw, she advised me. Set boundaries. Watch for manipulation tactics. And most importantly, protect your peace. Solid advice that would prove difficult to follow. Saturday evening arrived cool and clear. I arrived at Marcello's 10 minutes early, choosing a table with a clear view of the entrance. At exactly 7, they walked in. My father's hair had gone completely gray, and he moved with a slight stoop that hadn't been there before. My mother looked remarkably unchanged, perhaps a few more lines around her eyes. They spotted me immediately. The initial greeting was awkward. My mother attempted a hug that I turned into a handshake. My father nodded stiffly. We ordered drinks and made painfully superficial conversation. Yes. California weather was generally pleasant. No, I hadn't followed the Riverdale High School football team's recent championship. Yes, I was still doing something with computers. Not once did they ask about my company, my home, or my life. Not once did they acknowledge the 14-year absence or their role in it. It was as if they were deliberately skipping over the entire chapter, hoping I would play along. So, Brandon is engaged, my mother announced after our main courses arrived. To a lovely girl named Heather. Her father owns the biggest car dealership in the county. That's nice, I said, taking a sip of water. Congratulations to them. They're planning a June wedding. She continued. Which brings us to why we wanted to talk to you. And there it was. The real reason for this sudden family reunion. Brandon and Heather are having trouble finding the perfect venue. My father joined in. Everything locally is either booked or not quite what they're envisioning. That's unfortunate, I said. A sinking feeling in my stomach. We've heard you have a lovely property on a lake, my mother said, smiling as if this were a normal request. We thought it would be the perfect place for the wedding. Such a beautiful backdrop for photos, and plenty of room for guests. I stared at them, momentarily speechless. How did you know about my house? My father waved dismissively. Small world. Jim Harmon's son works for some tech company in Seattle. Said he'd been to a party at your place. Mentioned the lake view. The connection was tenuous but plausible. Jim's son Derek did work for Microsoft, and had attended a company event at our home last summer. What wasn't plausible was the leap from that information to asking to host a wedding for people I hadn't spoken to in 14 years. Let me get this straight, I said slowly. You haven't spoken to me since you threw me out at 18. No calls, no cards, nothing. And now you want to use my home for Brandon's wedding? Before either could respond, the restaurant's front door opened, and two more familiar figures approached our table. Brandon, taller and broader than I remembered but with the same confident stride. And beside him a slender blonde woman who I assumed was Heather. Perfect timing! My mother exclaimed, confirming this had been orchestrated. Mason, you remember your brother Brandon. And this is his fiancée, Heather Campbell. Brandon gave me an awkward nod. Hey bro, long time. Heather thrust her hand forward, flashing a diamond ring that caught the light. I've heard so much about you. Your parents say your lake house is absolutely dreamy. We're so excited to see it. The presumption left me momentarily stunned. They spoke as if my agreement was a foregone conclusion, as if my property was a family resource they were entitled to access. The wedding's on June 18th, Brandon continued, pulling out a chair for Heather before sitting down himself. We're thinking about 200 guests. The ceremony on the lawn facing the lake, then the reception. Wait, I interrupted, finding my voice. I haven't agreed to any of this. 4 pairs of eyes stared at me with expressions ranging from confusion to the beginnings of anger. But your mother said you were open to the idea, Heather said, her smile faltering. I looked at my mother, who had the grace to flush slightly. I said we were discussing it, she clarified. There's nothing to discuss, I said firmly. I'm not hosting a wedding for people I haven't seen or heard from in 14 years. My father's face darkened. After everything we did for you growing up, you can't do this one thing for your brother? The audacity nearly took my breath away. Everything you did for me? You disowned me. You cut me off completely when I was barely an adult. That's ancient history. My father dismissed. Families have disagreements. You chose to stay away all these years. I chose? My voice rose enough that nearby diners glanced our way. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to speak more quietly. You told me I wasn't part of the family anymore if I went to tech school. Those were your exact words. You always were oversensitive. My mother sighed. Holding grudges isn't healthy, Mason. Brandon leaned forward. Look, I know things were rough back then. But this is a chance to put it all behind us. Be part of the family again. Heather's dad is covering most of the wedding costs. We just need the location. The answer is no, I said definitively. I'm sorry you're having venue problems, but my home is not available. Heather's pleasant facade cracked. Is it the money? We could pay you something for the use of the property. The suggestion that this was a financial transaction rather than a profound boundary violation only reinforced my decision. This isn't about money. It's about respect. You can't ignore someone for 14 years and then expect to use their home for a major event. My father's hand came down hard on the table, rattling the silverware. This is exactly the kind of selfish behavior that's always been your problem. Always thinking about yourself instead of what the family needs. The family? I laughed without humor. I haven't been part of the family since 2009. You made that perfectly clear. You're just jealous, Brandon accused, his face flushing. You've always been jealous that Mom and Dad preferred me. Now you've got this fancy house and you want to lord it over us instead of helping out. I stood up, placing my napkin on the table. This conversation is over. I wish you both the best with your wedding, but it won't be at my home. Mason, be reasonable. My mother pleaded, reaching for my arm. I stepped back. I've been more than reasonable. Goodbye. I walked out of Marcello's with my heart pounding and a strange mix of emotions churning in my stomach. Anger at their entitlement. Hurt at the casual way they'd dismissed the abandonment. And beneath it all, a 14-year-old wound freshly reopened. By the time I reached my car, my phone was already buzzing with text messages. Brandon. Way to ruin everything as usual. My mother. Please reconsider. Family should come first. And most surprisingly, an unknown number that turned out to be Heather. We really had our hearts set on a lakeside wedding. Maybe we could come see the property, and you'll change your mind. I silenced my phone and drove home in a daze. When I walked through the door, Apollo greeted me with his usual enthusiasm. Completely unaware of the emotional storm I'd just weathered. I buried my face in his golden fur and allowed myself, for the first time in years, to cry over the family I'd lost. Sophia returned from Chicago the next day, and I told her everything. Her initial reaction was protective anger on my behalf, followed by practical concern. Do you think they'll let it go? She asked as we walked along the lakeshore with Apollo running ahead. I doubt it, I admitted. They've never been good at accepting no from me. I was right to be skeptical. Over the next few weeks, the pressure campaign escalated beyond anything I could have anticipated, revealing just how far they were willing to go to get what they wanted. The harassment began subtly. First came the emails from extended family members I hadn't heard from in years. Cousin Melanie, who had been kind to me as a child, wrote a lengthy message about the importance of forgiveness. Uncle Pete, my father's brother, sent a more direct note. Don't be difficult, Mason. It's just one day. And Susan, who I'd once been close to, called late one evening to reason with me. Your parents are getting older, she argued. Don't you want to reconcile while there's still time? Reconciliation requires acknowledgement and apology. I responded. They've offered neither. The messages increased in frequency and decreased in civility as the weeks passed. My mother called daily, alternating between guilt trips and thinly veiled accusations. My father left voicemails consisting mostly of variations on "Stop being stubborn" and "You owe the family this much." Brandon's tactics were more direct. "You think you're so much better than us now with your tech money and lake house. Guess what? You're still the same loser who couldn't cut it in the family business." I blocked his number after that one. Then came the deliveries. Wedding magazines appeared on my doorstep. Brochures from caterers and florists. Business cards from local wedding vendors. All addressed to Brandon and Heather Phillips, but delivered to my home. "This is getting weird," Sophia said, examining a sample wedding invitation that had arrived in the mail. "How did they even get our address?" The answer came a few days later when Apollo started barking frantically at the front window. I looked out to see my mother and Heather walking around our yard, peering into windows and taking photos. I stepped onto the porch. "What are you doing here?" Both women jumped guiltily. My mother recovered first. "Mason! We were just in the area and thought we'd take a look around. This really would be perfect for the ceremony." "You're trespassing," I said flatly. "Please leave." Heather had the decency to look embarrassed, but my mother seemed genuinely confused by my objection. "Don't be dramatic. We're family." "No, you're not," I corrected her. "Not anymore. That was your choice 14 years ago. Now, please leave before I call the police." The threat of police involvement got them moving, but the incident left me deeply unsettled. That evening, I installed a comprehensive security system with cameras covering every approach to the house. The following week, I was working from a coffee shop in the city when I overheard a familiar voice at a nearby table. Brandon was speaking intently into his phone, his back to me. "No, it's all set. The invitations went out last week with Mason's address. No, he's still being difficult, but it doesn't matter. We'll just show up with everyone and he can't exactly turn away 200 guests once they're there. Yeah, a surprise wedding basically. He'll get over it." I sat frozen, coffee halfway to my lips, as the enormity of their plan became clear. They weren't accepting my refusal. They were planning to force the issue by simply arriving with the entire wedding party. That evening, I did some investigating. A Google search for Brandon Phillips wedding led me to a wedding website where, to my shock, I found photos of my property as the venue. Photos taken without my permission during my mother and Heather's visit. The date was listed as June 18th, less than 3 weeks away. Further digging revealed they'd already booked local vendors using my address. A catering company, a rental firm for tables and chairs, a florist. All scheduled to deliver to my home on the wedding date. I called my father that night, anger making my voice shake. "I know about the surprise wedding plan. It's not happening." His response was dismissive. "You're overreacting as usual. This benefits everyone. You get to reconnect with family, Brandon gets his perfect venue. And we don't have to explain to everyone why you're so estranged." "It's trespassing," I said. "I will not allow it. You owe this to the family after walking away from us," he countered. "We'll be there whether you like it or not. Time to step up and do the right thing for once." After hanging up, I sat in stunned disbelief. The entitlement was so profound it bordered on delusional. They genuinely believed they had the right to commandeer my home against my explicit refusal. The final straw came a few days later at the local grocery store. I overheard 2 women discussing the Phillips wedding at the lake while standing in line. One mentioned she was looking forward to seeing that gorgeous property everyone's talking about. The realization that this had spread throughout the community, that people I didn't know were planning to attend a wedding at my home without my consent, sent a cold wave of panic through me. This wasn't just family pressure anymore. This was a coordinated invasion of my space, my sanctuary. That night, Sophia and I sat at our kitchen table, Apollo's head resting on my foot. and discussed our options. We could just go away that weekend, she suggested. Let them arrive to an empty, locked house. They'd probably break in, I said grimly. And I refused to be driven from my own home. Call the police when they show up? I considered it. That could get ugly fast. 200 people, including elderly relatives and kids, being confronted by police? I don't want that kind of scene. Then what do we do? Sophia asked, reaching for my hand across the table. I squeezed her fingers gently. We stop them before they ever arrive. The first step was legal. I called Trevor Lewis, our company's chief counsel and one of my closest friends, and explained the situation. He listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly concerned. This is textbook harassment, he said when I finished. And their plan constitutes criminal trespass. We can file for a restraining order immediately. Will that actually stop them? I asked. Trevor sighed. It creates legal consequences if they violate it. But determined people often ignore court orders. It's good documentation for later action, though. We filed the paperwork that afternoon. 3 days later, official notices were delivered to my parents, Brandon and Heather, and the wedding planner they'd hired. As predicted, all were ignored. My mother texted, "Stop being childish. This is happening." Legal avenues exhausted, we moved to Plan B. Sophia called a strategy meeting at our home, inviting Trevor and his wife Rachel, Marcus Chin and his security team, and our neighbor Doris Reynolds, whose straight-talking, no-nonsense attitude had made her an unlikely but valuable ally. You need to think like a military strategist, Marcus advised. Defend the perimeter, control access points, and have contingencies for every scenario. Over pizza and beer, we mapped out a comprehensive plan to prevent the wedding ambush. Marcus's security company would provide personnel to block all entrances to the property. The narrow access road would be barricaded half a mile before our driveway. The lakeside approach would be monitored as well, in case they attempted to arrive by boat. I'll position my best people at key points, Marcus said, all wearing body cameras for documentation. Trevor drafted a script for the security team to use, carefully worded to be firm but professional. We need to avoid any accusations of threatening behavior or excessive force, he explained. Everything by the book. Doris volunteered to be an independent witness. I'll park my car at the turnoff and watch everything, she said firmly. Nobody can claim anything happened that didn't if I'm sitting right there taking notes. We notified the local sheriff's office of the potential situation, providing copies of the restraining order and documentation of the harassment. Deputy Collins, who patrolled our area, promised to be on standby that day. I don't want to arrest anyone, I told him honestly. I just want them to respect my property rights. Understood, he said. But sometimes people need to see there are consequences to ignoring the law. The technical aspects came next. I upgraded our security system to include additional cameras covering every angle of the property. Motion sensors were installed along the perimeter. Everything would feed to a secure server that Trevor could access remotely, creating an indisputable record of events. Sophia and I arranged to vacate the property early on the morning of June 18th, leaving everything secured and the systems activated. We would monitor remotely from Trevor's office in the city, close enough to return quickly if necessary, but far enough to avoid direct confrontation. What about Apollo? Sophia asked, watching our golden retriever doze in a patch of sunlight. Rachel offered to take him for the day, I said. He loves playing with their Labrador anyway. With each element of the plan in place, I felt my anxiety begin to ease. We were prepared. We had contingencies. We had documentation and witnesses. Whatever happened on June 18th, we would handle it with dignity and firmness. A week before the planned wedding date, we ran a full test of all systems. Security team in position, cameras recording, communication channels open. Everything functioned perfectly. I still can't believe they thought they could pull this off, Sophia said that night as we sat on our deck watching the sunset reflect on the lake. It's consistent with how they've always operated, I replied. Their needs supersede everyone else's boundaries. They genuinely don't understand why this isn't okay. Do you think this will finally end it? She asked, leaning her head on my shoulder. Or will they find some new way to intrude? I wrapped my arm around her. I don't know. But whatever comes next, we'll face it together. As June 18th approached, I found myself experiencing a range of emotions I hadn't anticipated. Anger at the violation, certainly. Determination to protect my boundaries. But also a profound sadness for what my family relationships had become. And beneath it all, a small, irrational whisper of guilt that I ruthlessly silenced. I had nothing to feel guilty about. I was defending my home and my peace against people who had shown repeatedly that they didn't respect either. The night before the planned ambush, I barely slept. Sophia and I packed overnight bags and prepared the house for our early morning departure. Apollo sensed our tension, staying unusually close, occasionally nudging my hand with his nose as if to reassure me. Whatever happens tomorrow, Sophia said as we finally lay down to sleep, remember that you've done everything right. You set a boundary. You communicated it clearly. You're enforcing it reasonably. Their reaction is their responsibility, not yours. I held her close, grateful beyond words for her unwavering support. When did you get so wise? She smiled against my shoulder. I've always been wise. You were just too busy coding to notice. As dawn broke on June 18th, we took one last look at our peaceful lakeside home. For better or worse, by sunset, a message would be sent that couldn't be misinterpreted. The question was whether my family would finally hear it. The morning of June 18th arrived with picture-perfect weather, exactly the kind of day a couple would dream of for their lakeside wedding. Sophia and I were up before sunrise, making final preparations. Apollo sensed something unusual was happening and followed us anxiously from room to room as we secured windows and activated the security system. It's okay, buddy, I assured him, kneeling to ruffle his golden fur. You're going to have a great day with Rachel and Cooper. His tail wagged uncertainly. By 6:30 a.m. Marcus and his security team had arrived and taken their positions. Each wore a professional uniform and carried a clipboard with printed copies of the restraining order and property boundaries. All access points are covered, Marcus confirmed, showing me the live feed from each security position on his tablet. My people know to be firm but polite. No physical confrontation unless absolutely necessary for self-defense. Doris arrived next, parking her SUV at the turnoff where she would have a clear view of the main approach. At 72, she was spry and sharp as ever, dressed in what she called her witness outfit, a sensible blouse and slacks with a wide-brimmed hat to shield her from the sun. Got my thermos of coffee, my notebook, and my camera, she announced, and sandwiches for lunch. I'm set for the duration. Trevor pulled up at 7 a.m. in his sedan. Final checklist, he said, all business. Restraining order documentation? Copies at every security position and in your briefcase, I confirmed. Video recording systems? Active and uploading to secure cloud storage in real time. Police notification? Deputy Collins is aware and on call. Perfect. He nodded with satisfaction. Let's move to Phase 2. Phase 2 meant Sophia and I would leave the property while everything was quiet. Apollo went with Rachel, Trevor's wife, settling happily into her car with the promise of playtime with his canine friend Cooper. Sophia and I followed Trevor to his downtown office, where a conference room had been set up with multiple monitors showing live feeds from our property. And now we wait, Trevor said, settling into a chair with his laptop open. According to the wedding website we'd discovered, the ceremony was scheduled for 3 p.m., but vendors would begin arriving much earlier. We didn't have to wait long for the first confrontation. At 9:17 a.m., a white van with elegant events, painted on the side, approached the barricade on the access road. One of Marcus's security officers stepped forward as the van stopped. Through the camera's microphone, we could hear the exchange clearly. "Good morning. I'm afraid this road is closed for a private event." The driver looked confused. "I'm supposed to deliver tables and chairs for the Phillips wedding at the lake house. I'm sorry, but there's no wedding authorized at this property today. The owners have issued explicit instructions that no vendors or guests are to be admitted. But I have a contract." The driver shuffled through papers on the passenger seat. "I understand your confusion, sir. Unfortunately, whoever booked your services did so without the property owner's permission. Here's documentation of the situation, including a court-issued restraining order." The driver scanned the papers, his expression changing from confusion to annoyance. "So I loaded all this equipment for nothing? Who's going to pay me for my time? I'd suggest contacting the person who hired you. Again, I apologize for the inconvenience." The van eventually turned around and left. Similar scenes played out as florists, caterers, and photographers all arrived only to be turned away. Each interaction was recorded, each vendor given the same calm explanation. At 10:05 a.m., a black SUV approached the barricade. My parents had arrived. My father emerged from the driver's side, my mother from the passenger seat. Even through the camera feed, I could see the angry flush on my father's face as he strode toward the security officer. "What's the meaning of this? Remove this barricade immediately." "I'm sorry, sir. But this is private property. The owners have explicitly denied access to anyone associated with the Phillips wedding." My father's voice rose. "I am Gerald Phillips. My son owns this property." "Yes, sir. Mr. Mason Phillips is indeed the legal owner, and he has issued clear instructions that you are not permitted on the property. There is also an active restraining order, which I have a copy of here." My mother stepped forward, her voice taking on the pleading tone I remembered from childhood arguments. "There must be some mistake. We're family. We're expected today." "I'm afraid there's no mistake, ma'am. Mr. Phillips has been very clear about his wishes." My father's strategy shifted to intimidation. "Do you have any idea who you're dealing with? I'll have your job for this. Move this barricade now, or I'm calling the police." The security officer remained professional. "You're welcome to call the police, sir. They've been notified of the situation and have copies of the restraining order on file. Again, I apologize for any inconvenience." The confrontation continued for several minutes, my father's threats escalating while the security officer maintained his calm demeanor. Eventually, my parents retreated to their SUV, where my father made several angry phone calls. In the conference room, I watched with a mixture of vindication and sadness. "They really thought they could just bulldoze their way through," I murmured. Sophia squeezed my hand. "They're not used to your boundaries being enforced." The situation escalated further as guests began to arrive. Cars lined up along the county road, well-dressed people milling about in confusion. From Doris's position, we could see her calmly explaining the situation to anyone who approached her for information. At 1:30 p.m., the main event arrived. A stretch limousine pulled up to the barricade, and out stepped Brandon and Heather, both in full wedding attire. Brandon in a tuxedo, Heather in an elaborate white gown that immediately began collecting dust from the unpaved road. "This is private property," the security officer began. Brandon cut him off. "Where's Mason?" "I want to talk to my brother right now. Mr. Phillips is not on the premises. I'm authorized to speak on his behalf." Heather burst into tears, the perfect picture of a bride's day ruined. "How could he do this to us? Everything is ruined." Brandon put his arm around her shoulders while glaring at the security officer. "My brother is going to regret this. Do you have any idea how much money we've spent on this wedding? How many people have traveled to be here? I understand your frustration, sir. But this situation is the result of your decision to plan an event at a location without the owner's permission. Mr. Phillips has documented multiple instances of clearly communicating that his property was not available. The wedding planner, a harried-looking woman in a navy blue suit, emerged from the limo next. She immediately began making phone calls, presumably trying to find a last-minute alternative venue. The situation at the barricade grew increasingly chaotic as more guests arrived and the reality of the situation became clear. My parents moved through the crowd, alternating between apologizing to guests and making angry calls, presumably to me. At 2:15 p.m., Deputy Collins arrived in response to multiple calls. He spoke first with the security team, reviewed the documentation, then approached my parents and Brandon, though we couldn't hear their conversation clearly. The deputy's body language made it evident he was confirming that the security team was acting legally. The defining moment came at 2:45 p.m., captured perfectly on camera and audio. My father, frustrated by his inability to force his way onto the property, made a damning admission to the wedding planner while standing near one of our microphones. "Of course we knew he'd say no," he said dismissively. "Mason's always been difficult. But we figured once everyone was here, he'd have no choice but to go along with it. It's easier to ask forgiveness than permission." The wedding planner looked shocked. "You knew the property owner hadn't approved this? Why didn't you tell me? I've got 200 guests and no venue. In the conference room." Trevor immediately isolated this clip and saved it separately. "That's your smoking gun," he said. "Admission of intentional trespass attempt and awareness of your refusal." By 3:30 p.m., the scene had shifted. Many guests, upon learning the full situation, had departed in disgust. Others gathered at a local park where the wedding planner was attempting to salvage some kind of ceremony. Brandon and Heather had left in the limousine, reportedly headed to a hotel in the city. At 5 p.m., with the area finally clear, Sophia and I returned home. The security team remained in place. As Trevor suggested, my parents might attempt to return once they knew I was back. He was right. At 7:15 p.m., my parents' SUV approached the barricade again. This time, I chose to meet them, with Marcus accompanying me as witness and protection. My father emerged from the vehicle, his earlier rage now replaced with cold anger. "Are you satisfied? You've humiliated your brother on what should have been the happiest day of his life." I kept my voice level. "Brandon humiliated himself by thinking he could use my home against my will. You could have just gone along with it," my mother said, her voice trembling. "One day. That's all we asked?" "That's not all you asked," I corrected her. "You asked me to allow 200 strangers into my home after 14 years of no contact. You asked me to reward your abandonment with access to the life I'd built without you. You asked me to show more respect for your wishes than you ever showed for mine. Always so dramatic." My father scoffed. "This is why you never fit in with this family." "You're right about that," I agreed. "And I'm finally okay with it. This is the last time I'll say this: do not contact me. Do not come to my property. Do not attempt to use me or what I've built. The restraining order is active for 1 year. If you violate it, I will press charges." My mother's face crumpled. "You would do that to your own parents? You disowned me," I reminded her gently. "You can't disown someone and still claim parental privileges when it's convenient. That's not how it works." There was nothing left to say after that. They left without further argument, two defeated figures in a black SUV, disappearing down the county road as the sun set over the lake. Back inside our home, with Apollo happily returned and the security team finally dismissed, Sophia and I sat on the deck with glasses of wine. "Do you think they've finally gotten the message?" she asked. I considered the question carefully. I think they've realized they can't control me anymore. Whether they understand why what they did was wrong, I doubt it. "Are you okay?" Her eyes searched my face with concern. I smiled, surprising myself with how genuine it felt. I am. For the first time in a long time, I feel like that chapter might actually be closed. On my terms, not theirs. We sat in comfortable silence, watching night fall over the water, our home once again the peaceful sanctuary we'd created together. The days following what Sophia dubbed the wedding that wasn't passed in surprising tranquility. The security cameras remained active, but no unauthorized visitors appeared. My phone stayed blessedly silent from family calls. It was as if, having played their final hand and lost, my parents and Brandon had finally accepted defeat. The peace was disturbed only by the ripples of gossip that inevitably spread through my hometown's social circles. Former classmates I hadn't spoken to in years sent Facebook messages ranging from supportive to accusatory. Heard about the wedding drama. Good for you for standing your ground. Wrote my old lab partner from chemistry class. How could you do that to your own brother? Demanded someone I barely remembered from the baseball team. I responded to none of them. This wasn't a public spectacle for debate. It was the enforcement of a private boundary that should never have needed enforcing in the first place. Doris, our neighbor who had witnessed everything, became an unexpected ally in processing the aftermath. One evening a week after the incident, she invited Sophia and me for coffee on her porch overlooking the lake. You know, I've lived 72 years and raised 4 children, she said, pouring coffee into delicate cups that had belonged to her grandmother. And the one thing I've learned is that family isn't about blood. It's about who treats you like you matter. Her words resonated deeply. Throughout my life, the people who had treated me like I mattered were rarely those connected to me by genetics. Mr. Reeves, my high school computer teacher who'd recognized my potential. Professor Keller at tech school. Sophia, who had believed in me when I barely believed in myself. Trevor and Marcus and their families. And Doris herself, who had volunteered to sit in her car all day to support neighbors she'd known for only 2 years. These were the people who had shown up. These were my real family. 3 weeks after the confrontation, an unexpected text arrived from Brandon. It was short but startling in its self-awareness. I was wrong. I'm sorry. Not asking for forgiveness. Just wanted you to know. I stared at the message for a long time before showing it to Sophia. Are you going to respond? She asked. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to. But another part feels like any response might reopen a door I've finally managed to close. In the end, I waited 2 days before sending a simple reply. Thank you for saying that. We didn't exchange any further messages immediately, but something had shifted. A tiny acknowledgement that perhaps, someday, some form of relationship might be possible. On different terms. With clear boundaries. Meanwhile, life continued. Philips' security systems expanded into new markets. Sophia was promoted to Chief Technology Officer. We added a screened porch to the lake house where Apollo could enjoy the outdoors without chasing after every squirrel and chipmunk. 4 months after the wedding incident, I received a formal letter from my parents. Unlike their previous communications, this one was measured and respectful, though it stopped short of a full apology. We've had time to reflect on recent events, they wrote. While we may see things differently, we recognize that our actions regarding Brandon's wedding were inappropriate. We hope that with time, some form of communication might be possible. It wasn't everything I might have wanted, but it was more accountability than they had ever shown before. I chose to see it as a positive sign without immediately acting on their tentative olive branch. The true surprise came at Christmas, when Brandon reached out again with a more substantial message. Mason, I've been doing a lot of thinking since June. Heather and I eventually had a small ceremony at her parents' lake house in August. Being there made me realize how wrong we were to try to force our way into your home. I've started talking to a therapist about some family stuff, and I'm seeing things differently now. Mom and Dad always favored me, and I took advantage of that without thinking about how it affected you. I'm not asking for anything, Just wanted you to know I'm trying to do better. Merry Christmas. This time, I responded more fully, thanking him for his reflections and wishing him well in his marriage and therapy journey. We began a cautious, occasional text exchange that contained more honesty than we'd managed in our entire childhood. 1 year after the wedding confrontation, I agreed to meet Brandon for lunch in the city. Neutral territory for both of us. Sophia offered to come along, but I decided this was something I needed to do alone. The restaurant was busy with a weekday lunch crowd when Brandon arrived, looking both familiar and like a stranger. We shook hands awkwardly before sitting down. "You look good," he said. "Success suits you." "Thanks," I replied. "How's married life?" "Good. Different than I expected, but good. Heather's pregnant, actually. Due in November." "Congratulations. That's wonderful news." An uncomfortable silence settled between us as we studied our menus with unnecessary intensity. After we ordered, Brandon cleared his throat. "I want to say something. And I need you to just let me get it out, okay?" I nodded, bracing myself. "I was a terrible brother to you growing up," he said, his voice steady but quiet. "I knew Mom and Dad favored me, and I used it to my advantage. I never stood up for you, even when I knew they were being unfair. When they disowned you, I went along with it because it was easier than challenging them." He paused, taking a sip of water. "My therapist says I was caught in a toxic family system and playing my assigned role, but that doesn't excuse it. I should have been better. I should have been there for you when you were sleeping in your car and working 3 jobs to get through school. I'm sorry, Mason. Truly sorry." The words I'd never expected to hear from any member of my family. Simple. Direct. Unqualified by excuses or deflections. "Thank you," I said when I could trust my voice. "That means a lot. I'm not asking to be best friends or anything." He continued. "I know too much has happened. But I'd like to know my brother, if that's something you might want to. Eventually." I considered his words carefully. "I think I'd like that. Eventually. Small steps. Small steps." He agreed with a nod. We spent the rest of lunch catching up on the safer aspects of our lives. His work at the hardware store, which was now modernizing with an online presence he was developing. My company's recent expansion. Heather's pregnancy and their plans for the nursery. Sophia's latest projects. When we parted, our handshake turned into a brief, awkward hug. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, nor was it reconciliation in any complete sense. But it was an acknowledgement of possibility. A door cracked open just enough to let in some fresh air. My parents remained more distant. We exchanged occasional emails, formal and carefully worded. They had not yet managed the level of self-reflection Brandon had achieved, but they respected the boundaries I'd established. It was enough for now. 2 years after the wedding incident, Sophia and I hosted a dinner party at our lake house for our chosen family. Trevor and Rachel were there with their children. Marcus and Diana brought homemade spring rolls. Doris arrived with her famous apple pie. New friends and colleagues filled out the gathering, 20 people whose connections were formed by choice rather than obligation. As the evening wound down, we gathered on the deck overlooking the lake, strings of lights twinkling above us like stars. Apollo moved contentedly from guest to guest, accepting pets and treats with equal enthusiasm. "I'd like to propose a toast," Trevor said, raising his glass. "To Mason and Sophia, who remind us all what it means to build something beautiful on your own terms. To boundaries that protect what matters," added Marcus with a knowing smile. "To chosen family," Sophia said, her eyes meeting mine across the gathering. I looked around at the faces of people who had shown up not because they wanted something from me, but because they valued who I was. People who had demonstrated through actions, not just words, that I mattered to them. "To all of you," I said, raising my glass in return, "for being the family I found along the way." Later, As the last guests departed and Sophia and I stood on the dock watching moonlight ripple across the water, she wrapped her arms around my waist. "Happy?" she asked, resting her head against my shoulder. "Completely," I answered, and meant it. The journey from abandoned 18-year-old to this moment had been long and often painful. There were still unresolved hurts, still relationships that might never be fully healed. But standing there, in the home we built together, surrounded by the love of people who had chosen us as deliberately as we had chosen them, I felt something I recognized as peace. Not the absence of conflict, but the presence of wholeness on my own terms. The knowledge that I was enough, exactly as I was. That I had always been enough, even when those who should have seen it couldn't. And that knowledge, hard-won through years of struggle and final confrontation, was worth everything. Have you ever had to set a difficult boundary with family or friends? Share your experience in the comments below. Remember that standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's an act of self-respect. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of personal growth and overcoming family challenges. And if you know someone who might need to hear this message, share it with them. Sometimes knowing we're not alone in these struggles makes all the difference. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, family is who treats you like you matter, whether they share your DNA or not.